Car.
Let me guess, it's not actually yours. So who does it really belong to?
It's mine, officer. The registration is in the glove compartment. Everything is under my name.
And I'm supposed to believe that? People like you don't just own cars like this.
I do, and I haven't
smart
committed
with
any
me.
violation.
Step out of the vehicle.
Officer, you don't have legal grounds to remove me. I'm asking for the reason for this stop.
Out, now. Hands behind.
Officer Ryan Caldwell, badge number 7218 of the Northbridge Police Department, made the most catastrophic mistake of his 16-year career at 2:47 p.m. on a warm Sunday afternoon. He was parked near the entrance of the Lakeshore Promenade, one of the wealthiest shopping districts in the city, when he noticed a black Mercedes-Benz E-Class rolling slowly through the lot. The driver was a black woman in her early 40s. That alone was enough for Caldwell. He straightened in his seat, eyes narrowing, the familiar conclusions forming instantly in his mind. Expensive car, affluent area, someone who, in his opinion, didn't fit. He activated his lights. Inside the Mercedes, Alyssa Monroe saw the flash in her rearview mirror and felt a brief tightening in her chest. She signaled immediately, pulled into an open parking space near the main entrance, and placed both hands calmly on the steering wheel. She had done absolutely nothing wrong. Alyssa was 41 years old, a seasoned legal professional with nearly 18 years of experience navigating courtrooms, hostile witnesses, and political pressure. Just 9 days earlier, the governor had announced her appointment as the new state chief prosecutor, a role she would officially assume Monday morning at 8:30 a.m. today. However, she wasn't thinking about power or titles. She had spent the morning shopping for her new office, modest, practical things: a desk lamp, file organizers, framed photos of her parents, supplies stacked neatly in the back seat of the car she had worked years to afford. The Mercedes wasn't a luxury to her. It was the result of discipline, sacrifice, and a career built without shortcuts. Officer Caldwell exited his patrol vehicle with deliberate confidence, his right hand resting near his holster. His partner, Officer Evan Brooks, remained in the passenger seat, younger, quieter, already uneasy. Brooks had learned that when Caldwell got that look, it was safer to observe than to intervene. Caldwell approached the driver's window. Before Alyssa could speak, he leaned down and said loudly and without hesitation, "Where did you steal this car from?" The words landed like a slap. "That's the only way someone like you ends up driving something like this." Several pedestrians nearby slowed. A few stopped. Alyssa's expression did not change. "Officer," she replied evenly, "I own this vehicle. It's registered in my name. I haven't committed any offense. Can you tell me why I was stopped?" Caldwell didn't answer. "License and registration," he snapped. "I'll provide them," Alyssa said calmly, "but I am requesting the legal reason for this stop." "You're driving a stolen vehicle," Caldwell replied flatly, as if stating an established fact. Alyssa reached slowly for her glove compartment, narrating each movement. "I'm retrieving my registration now. My wallet is on the passenger seat." She handed him both documents. Everything was valid, current, legitimate. Caldwell stared at the paperwork longer than necessary. In that moment, he realized the truth. There was no crime, no justification, no authority to continue. A reasonable officer would have ended the stop. Caldwell chose something else. "These documents could be fake," he said, shoving them back. "Step out of the vehicle so I can verify ownership." Alyssa's voice remained steady but firmer now. "You have no legal basis to remove me. You have my registration. You have my license. Please state the lawful reason for this stop." Behind them, phones were coming out. "Step out of the car," Caldwell repeated louder. "Last warning." Alyssa activated the audio recording on her mounted phone. "I am asserting my Fourth Amendment rights," she said clearly. "You do not have probable cause to detain or search me." That was the moment Caldwell lost control. He grabbed the door handle and yanked it open. "You're coming out," he barked. "I am not resisting," Alyssa said as he seized her arm. "I am complying under protest. You are removing me without cause." He pulled her from the vehicle, spun her around, and slammed her against the hood. Shopping bags shifted inside the car. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed across the parking lot. Gasps rippled through the crowd. At least 5 phones were now recording. Officer Brooks stepped out of the patrol car, pale. "Ryan, what are you doing?" he asked. "Stolen vehicle, non-compliant suspect," Caldwell said, breath heavy. Alyssa turned her head slightly toward the body camera. "My name is Alyssa Monroe," she said calmly. "I am the incoming state chief prosecutor. You are committing serious crimes on camera." Caldwell didn't respond. The afternoon sun burned overhead as the moment that would destroy everything he had built continued to unfold. Officer Evan Brooks stood frozen for a split second, staring at the woman pinned against the hood of the Mercedes, then at Caldwell, then back at the growing crowd. What Alyssa had just said echoed in his head, refusing to be ignored. "Incoming state chief prosecutor." Brooks had seen the announcement scroll across his phone less than 2 weeks earlier. He hadn't paid attention to the name then. Now, looking at her calm posture, the precision of her words, and the complete absence of panic, something cold settled in his stomach. "Ryan," Brooks said quietly, lowering his voice, "did you hear what she just told you?" Caldwell scoffed without turning around. She's bluffing. People say that crap all the time when they get caught. Judges, lawyers, prosecutors. It's intimidation. Alyssa turned her head slightly, directing her voice toward Brooks instead. Officer Brooks, she said evenly, your body camera is active. You are currently witnessing an unlawful detention and arrest. I strongly advise you to separate yourself from this situation immediately. Brooks took an involuntary step backward. Her tone wasn't angry, it wasn't emotional, it was factual, professional, like someone used to consequences. He reached for his radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 12, Brooks said, trying to keep his voice steady. Requesting a supervisor to Lakeshore Promenade North parking area. Caldwell spun around. What the hell are you doing? I'm asking for oversight, Brooks replied. This doesn't feel right. I didn't authorize that, Caldwell snapped. You don't have to, Brooks said quietly. The crowd had grown noticeably. Shoppers slowed, then stopped. A middle-aged man pointed his phone directly at Caldwell's face. A woman near the sidewalk spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. She didn't do anything. We saw the whole thing. Back up, Caldwell barked, gesturing aggressively. You're interfering with a police investigation. I'm standing on public property, the woman replied calmly, and I'm recording a public official. That's my right, more voices joined in. Let her go. This is racial profiling. Someone call the news. Caldwell felt control slipping, and the loss of control made him dig in harder. He walked around to the passenger side of the Mercedes and peered inside through the windows. Office supplies filled the back seat, store logos, receipts clearly visible through transparent bags, nothing remotely suspicious. Still, he announced loudly, I'm conducting a search of the vehicle. You do not have probable cause, Alyssa said immediately. I do not consent to any search. Anything you do now will be illegal. I smell marijuana, Caldwell declared, projecting his voice toward his body camera. Brooks closed his eyes for a brief moment. He had been sitting in the patrol car the entire time. There was no smell, not even close. That is false, Alyssa said calmly. There is no marijuana in my vehicle. Officer Caldwell just fabricated probable cause on camera. Caldwell ignored her and opened the passenger door. He searched the glove compartment first, manuals, insurance documents, neatly organized paperwork. Then the center console, then the back seat. He pulled items from shopping bags as if hoping one of them might magically justify everything he'd already done. The crowd watched in disbelief. A black SUV with department markings pulled into the lot and stopped sharply behind the patrol car. Lieutenant Samuel Ortega stepped out, 23 years on the force, calm, observant, impossible to impress. He took in the scene in seconds. A black woman in handcuffs, a luxury vehicle mid-search, multiple civilians recording, one officer visibly agitated, the other clearly distressed. Ortega's jaw tightened. Caldwell, he said firmly. Step away from the vehicle, now. Caldwell hesitated, then complied, moving a step back. Brooks, Ortega said, turning to him, brief me. Before Brooks could speak, Caldwell jumped in. Stolen vehicle stop, Caldwell said quickly. Driver refused to cooperate. I detected narcotics odor and initiated a search. Ortega didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked directly to Alyssa. Ma'am, he said calmly, tell me what happened. Alyssa met his eyes. I was stopped without cause. I was accused of stealing my own vehicle based solely on my race. I provided valid documentation. Officer Caldwell ignored it, fabricated probable cause, forcibly removed me, and placed me in handcuffs when I asserted my constitutional rights. Everything is recorded. Ortega straightened and turned slowly toward Caldwell. Show me the stolen vehicle report. Caldwell froze. I dispatch, said. Ortega raised his radio. Dispatch, confirm any stolen vehicle reports matching this plate or description today. The reply came almost instantly. Negative, Lieutenant, no such reports. Silence fell over the parking lot. Ortega's eyes hardened. Why is she in cuffs? He asked quietly. Brooks swallowed. Sir, I did not observe any crime, and I did not smell marijuana. Caldwell stared at Brooks in disbelief. Ortega turned back to Alyssa. Ma'am, are you an attorney? No, Alyssa replied. Caldwell let out a short, bitter laugh. Here we go. Ortega raised a hand without looking at him. Then who are you? Alyssa inhaled once. I am the incoming state chief prosecutor. The words landed like a controlled explosion. No one spoke. Caldwell's face drained of color. Ortega took a slow step back. Sir, Alyssa added calmly, my official identification is in my wallet on the front seat. Ortega retrieved it carefully. The seal, the title, the photograph, his hands tightened. Remove the cuffs, he said immediately. And in that moment, Caldwell understood far too late that his career was already over. Lieutenant Samuel Ortega unlocked the cuffs with controlled urgency, his movements careful, almost ceremonial. The metal released with a sharp click, and Alyssa rolled her wrist slowly, the skin already marked where the restraints had bitten too tight. I'm sorry, Ortega said, voice low. This should not have happened. Alyssa didn't answer with comfort or forgiveness. She simply nodded once, as if acknowledging a fact already documented. Officer Caldwell stood a few feet away, rigid, staring at the ground like it might open and swallow him. His earlier confidence had evaporated. The crowd, still filming, shifted from shock to something sharper, certainty that they had just witnessed the kind of abuse people argued about online, but rarely saw unfold so clearly in daylight. Ortega turned to Brooks. "Start a perimeter, keep the scene calm, no one touches that vehicle again." "Yes, sir," Brooks said immediately, relief and dread mixing in his eyes. Ortega then faced Caldwell. "Ryan," he said flatly, "hand me your keys." Caldwell blinked. "Lieutenant, listen, keys now." Caldwell's hand trembled as he unclipped them from his belt and placed them into Ortega's palm. Ortega didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to, his authority was heavier than yelling. "You are relieved of duty," Ortega continued. "You will not conduct further enforcement actions today. You will stand by while I coordinate next steps." Caldwell's mouth opened, but nothing useful came out. Alyssa stepped away from the hood and looked around at the bystanders. Several people still held phones high, capturing every angle. The patrol car, Caldwell's face, Ortega's calm control, Alyssa's reddened wrists. She lifted her chin slightly. "If you recorded," she said clearly, "do not delete it. Preserve the original files. This will matter." A man in a business jacket nodded. "Already uploaded," he said. "Multiple places." Alyssa turned back to Ortega. "Lieutenant," she said, tone precise, "I want medical documentation of the restraint marks and the physical handling. I also want the names and badge numbers of every officer involved." Ortega nodded. "You'll have it." Caldwell suddenly found his voice again, thin and defensive. "She was disrespectful," he blurted. "She refused my commands. I had to secure the scene." Alyssa didn't flinch. "I asked for lawful justification," she said calmly. "That is not disrespect. That is a constitutional request." Ortega's eyes cut toward Caldwell like a blade. "Stop talking," he said. "Every word you add is evidence." Caldwell swallowed. Within minutes, another vehicle arrived, a patrol supervisor unit, followed by a small, unmarked sedan. Officers moved with unusual caution now, aware of cameras and the weight of what had already been captured. Ortega spoke into his radio, concise and steady. "Control, initiate incident protocol, separate involved officers, secure body cam footage immediately, notify command." Caldwell's face tightened at the word secure. He knew what it meant. Automatic preservation, no editing, no quiet deletion, no technical failure excuses. Alyssa's phone still recorded from its mount. She stepped closer to her Mercedes but did not touch anything, watching as an officer with gloves photographed the interior, the open passenger door, the disturbed bags. Ortega approached her again. "Ma'am," he said, "are you requesting to file a formal complaint now or later through counsel?" Alyssa's eyes remained steady. "Both," she replied, "but understand something clearly. This is not just a complaint. This is a criminal matter." Ortega's jaw flexed. He didn't disagree. Caldwell tried again, desperation leaking into his tone. "Lieutenant, come on, we can handle this internally. I made a call." It wasn't perfect, but Ortega stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Caldwell could hear. "You didn't make a call. You made an accusation without cause, escalated without justification, and lied to create probable cause. In front of witnesses, on camera, if you were anyone else, you'd already be in the back seat." Caldwell's eyes widened. "You can't." Ortega held up one finger. "Do not force me to decide that right now." Caldwell went silent. Alyssa, meanwhile, was already moving ahead mentally, not with rage, but with structure. She asked Ortega for the precinct commander's contact, the duty captain, and the city attorney's information. She requested the CAD incident number. She requested confirmation in writing that the footage would be preserved. Ortega complied, giving instructions to a sergeant who began documenting every detail with visible unease. Then one of the responding supervisors approached Alyssa with a hesitant expression. "Ma'am," he said, "we can escort you somewhere private. This is getting attention." Alyssa glanced at the crowd. Reporters hadn't arrived yet, but someone had already shouted that they were on their way. She gave a small nod. "Yes," she said, "but before I leave, I want one more thing on record." She turned, looking directly at Caldwell, who still stood near the patrol car like a man watching his life collapse in slow motion. "Officer Caldwell," she said, voice cold and clear, "I have reviewed departmental patterns for years as part of statewide policy work. Your name appears more often than it should. Starting Monday, that will no longer be ignored." Caldwell's lips parted, but the words didn't form. Ortega exhaled once, as if he already knew what Monday would bring. And somewhere behind the crowd, a siren wailed in the distance, not for danger, but for attention, as the first news van turned onto the boulevard leading to the shopping district. Monday morning arrived without drama on the surface, but beneath it, everything was already shifting. At 7:15 a.m., Alyssa Monroe walked into the state prosecutor's office for the first time in her official capacity. The building buzzed with quiet excitement. Staff members smiled, congratulated her, shook her hand. No one mentioned the incident at Lakeshore Promenade. Most of them hadn't seen it yet. At 7:42, she requested an immediate closed-door meeting with Police Commissioner Harold Bennett and the city's legal counsel. By 8:05, they were seated across from her in a private conference room, expecting a brief courtesy introduction. Instead, Alyssa placed a tablet on the table. "I need you to watch something," she said. She pressed play. The room fell silent as body camera footage filled the screen. Officer Caldwell's voice echoed clearly, the accusation, the assumption. The escalation, the lie about marijuana, the handcuffs, the crowd. The moment her title was spoken aloud in the parking lot, no one interrupted. When the final civilian video ended, the commissioner leaned back slowly, color draining from his face. "This happened to you," he said, not as a question. "This happens to people every day," Alyssa replied. "The only difference is that this time the person on the receiving end has authority." The city attorney cleared his throat. "Officer Caldwell has a prior record." Alyssa slid a thin folder across the table. 21 civilian complaints over 16 years, disproportionately involving Black and Latino drivers, nearly all stops in high-income areas. Every complaint dismissed by the same internal review officer. The commissioner closed his eyes briefly. "Effective immediately," he said, "Caldwell will be placed on administrative leave." "That's not enough," Alyssa replied evenly. "This is not an internal discipline issue. This is a civil rights violation." The commissioner nodded. "Internal Affairs will open a full investigation today." And Alyssa added, "My office will refer this case for independent prosecution. I am recusing myself from direct involvement due to conflict of interest, but I will appoint a special prosecutor by noon." The city attorney shifted in his seat. "The footage is already circulating." "I know," Alyssa said. "That's why we move fast." By 10:30 a.m., Caldwell's badge and service weapon were surrendered. His access credentials were revoked. He was escorted out of the precinct through a side entrance as reporters gathered outside the main doors. At 11:15, Internal Affairs froze all related records. Body cam logs, patrol patterns, stop data, complaint histories. What they found wasn't subtle. 87% of Caldwell's traffic stops involved drivers of color. In affluent districts, the number rose above 90%. Search rates were disproportionately high, arrest outcomes disproportionately low. The pattern was undeniable. By early afternoon, the Department of Justice requested preliminary materials for a federal review. A civil rights inquiry was officially opened before the end of the day. Meanwhile, Alyssa sat with the special prosecutor she had appointed, a former federal civil rights attorney known for being meticulous and uncompromising. "This will not be quick," he told her. "It doesn't need to be," Alyssa replied. "It needs to be complete." That evening, news coverage exploded nationwide. Clips of the stop ran on loop. Commentary flooded social media. Former residents of Northbridge came forward with eerily similar stories. By Wednesday, 9 individuals had contacted the prosecutor's office, describing nearly identical encounters with Caldwell over the past decade. By Friday, the city announced it would cooperate fully with all investigations. Caldwell, meanwhile, sat alone in his living room, watching his own face replayed across every major network. His phone buzzed nonstop, messages from colleagues distancing themselves, friends asking what happened, supervisors instructing him not to speak to anyone. For the first time in his career, no one was protecting him. And he understood with terrifying clarity that the stop he thought would last 10 minutes had already dismantled everything he thought was permanent. By the end of the second week, the case against Ryan Caldwell was no longer theoretical. It was formal. A federal grand jury convened quietly on a Thursday morning. By Friday afternoon, indictments were filed. Caldwell was charged with deprivation of rights under color of law, false imprisonment, official misconduct, and falsification of police reports. Each count carried real prison time. The arrest came early. At 6:18 a.m., 2 unmarked vehicles stopped in front of Caldwell's house. He opened the door in sweatpants, already knowing why they were there. The agents were professional, calm, and efficient. They read the charges. They placed him in cuffs, not too tight, not roughly, but firmly. The irony did not go unnoticed by the cameras waiting across the street. News footage showed Caldwell being escorted into the back seat, head down, the same posture he had forced onto others for years. Inside the prosecutor's office, the calls kept coming. More victims, 8 in total, then 11. Drivers stopped without cause, searches justified by fabricated smells, detentions that escalated when questions were asked, every story different in detail, identical in pattern. They filed a joint civil suit against the city. The amount, $9.1 million. Internal Affairs finalized its report shortly after. The findings were brutal. Caldwell's conduct was not an anomaly, it was consistent, predictable, enabled. Supervisors had ignored red flags, review officers had dismissed evidence. A system designed to protect had instead insulated misconduct. The city moved to settle. 9 months later, the agreement was signed in full. Caldwell was held personally liable for $540,000. His savings were gone, his pension terminated, his home entered foreclosure within weeks. His wife filed for divorce shortly after the sentencing phase began. The criminal trial lasted 18 days. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours, guilty on all counts. Caldwell was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison, followed by supervised release. He was permanently barred from law enforcement in any jurisdiction nationwide. As he was led away, he finally understood something he had dismissed his entire career. Power had never come from the badge. It had come from the system allowing him to misuse it, and the system had stopped. The fallout didn't stop with one conviction. Within weeks of the verdict, Alyssa Monroe introduced a sweeping reform package that reshaped law enforcement oversight across the state. The legislation moved fast, fueled by public pressure and evidence no one could refute. Body cameras became mandatory for all public interactions. Any unexplained deactivation triggered automatic review. Stop-and-search data was centralized and analyzed monthly for racial disparities. Officers whose patterns exceeded statistical thresholds were flagged for early intervention or removal. Civilian review boards were granted subpoena power. For the first time, they didn't just recommend discipline, they enforced accountability. Mandatory bias and constitutional rights training was implemented statewide, not as a formality, but as a requirement tied directly to continued certification. Failure meant suspension, repeated failure meant termination. The numbers changed quickly. Within 2 years, racially disproportionate traffic stops dropped by over 60%. Complaints of unlawful searches fell sharply. More importantly, officers began thinking twice, not because they feared punishment, but because the rules were finally clear and unavoidable. The department itself began to change. 24 officers resigned rather than submit to the new oversight. 3 supervisors were disciplined for past failures to act. 1 internal affairs investigator quietly retired before reopening reviews could reach his desk. Alyssa remained deliberately distant from individual prosecutions. Her role was structural, not personal, but she tracked outcomes closely, demanding metrics instead of promises. 5 years later, she stood on a stage accepting a national award for criminal justice reform. When asked about the moment that sparked it all, she answered simply, "It wasn't unique. It was just documented." Across the city, training academies began using anonymized footage from past misconduct cases, including Caldwell's, as required instruction. Recruits didn't watch it for shock value. They watched it to understand exactly how abuse begins, with assumptions, ego, and unchecked authority. Meanwhile, Ryan Caldwell served his sentence quietly. No interviews, no appeals that went anywhere. When he was released early for good behavior, he was 51 years old, living in a small apartment outside the city, working a retail job that barely covered rent. No pension, no badge, no audience. One night he saw Alyssa on the news again, this time announcing the latest annual report showing continued declines in misconduct statewide. The segment mentioned briefly the traffic stop years earlier that had triggered reform. Caldwell turned off the television. For the first time, there was nothing left to argue with. Years later, the incident at Lakeshore Promenade was no longer breaking news. It had become a reference point. Law schools cited it when discussing constitutional protections. Police academies used it as a case study on how authority collapses when accountability is ignored. Civil rights organizations referenced it as proof that systemic change doesn't begin with slogans, it begins with consequences. Alyssa Monroe continued her work quietly. She was reelected by the widest margin in state history, not because of charisma, but because the numbers spoke for themselves. Complaints down, trust up, oversight normalized. When asked in interviews whether the case was personal, she always corrected the premise. "It wasn't about me," she said. "It was about visibility. Millions of people experienced this without cameras, without witnesses, without leverage. The reforms outlived the outrage. They became policy. Ryan Caldwell faded from public memory. After his release, he avoided attention, moved cities twice, and stopped telling people what he used to do for a living. Employers didn't care. The badge had no value outside the system that once protected him. Occasionally, he thought about the moment he stepped out of his patrol car that Sunday afternoon. How ordinary it felt, how certain he had been. How unnecessary it all was. There was no dramatic redemption, no apology tour, just a quiet understanding that one assumption acted on with authority had erased everything else. The lesson remained long after the headlines disappeared. A badge does not grant power, the Constitution does. And when it's violated, accountability always arrives sooner or later. If stories like this matter to you, share them, talk about them. Question authority when it demands obedience without justification. Change doesn't start in courtrooms or legislatures. It starts the moment people refuse to stay silent.